my dudes, what's happening, man? I am on a mission. I am on a freaking mission. I am bound and determined to improve my landscape painting process. And I want to take you along for the ride. And I did a workshop about this, breaking down everything that I currently know about landscape painting and adding in new things to match the art style of specific games. Specifically, in this case, I'm looking at the Fortnite art style, which isn't too much of a stretch because I did design a bunch of environments for Fortnite a few years back, which I can't show. But I wanted to do a quick 10-minute summary of everything here on the YouTube. Well, because I know that not everybody appreciates step-by-step hand-holding 3-hour videos explaining every detail of how to do all this stuff. You just want to see the magic. I'll give you the magic, man. I'll give you the magic. Getting started, there's a lot of ways that you can do studies to just flood your mind with ideas for what kind of biome you want to create, for what kind of mountains you might want to have, or what kind of natural organic shapes. If you want it to feel grounded in our world, even though it's stylized or maybe realistic, you're going to want to still pull up some really great reference material to flood your subconscious mind and get you dreaming about these spaces so that when you're halfway done with your painting and you go to bed at night, you wake up the next day and you've got more ideas for what you want to work into your living, breathing environment. The purpose of doing these sketches and thumbnails, both from reference and from your imagination, is to reestablish and constantly reaffirm in your mind how to create depth, how to create value distinction from your foreground, middle ground, and background, so it almost feels like flattened plates. And also, you want to add in new kinds of shape language into your vocabulary so that you can create different types of biomes from memory. You're basically teaching your brain all new words, but they're visual words. That's going to be so key for you to develop these skills, and it's the kind of thing that you should be practicing all the time. When you ask a pro, like, how do I get better? They always say, oh, just keep practicing. And usually the answer screaming back at them is, well, what the hell do I practice? Well, this is it. This is what you should be practicing. But I'll tell you what, if you don't bother with learning fundamentals of two-point perspective, basic lighting, basic forms and material rendering or reflective surfaces, if you never practice those basics and fundamentals, you won't ever be able to do amazing paintings. Because yes, if you want to do landscapes with buildings in them, you're gonna have to learn perspective. Don't skimp on the basics. In fact, once you get the basics down, start applying them to every painting that you do and go through the damn checklist in your mind. Do I have good forms? Is all of my buildings in the same lighting situation? Are all of my buildings in the same perspective? All that stuff. You're going through the checklist in your mind with every one of these 40-minute experiments, 40-minute studies. You're especially going to be watching for composition in these explorations too. You want to make sure you don't have tangents where objects are just barely touching each other, or objects aren't getting a little too close to the edge of the frame or things like that. You want to make sure that your image has good flow to it and readability before you go and put a bunch of time into rendering. Once you have a creative exploration that you really like for a landscape in grayscale, now it's time to start applying color. In this method, I started out by creating a multiply layer and just started laying down color because it's easier to brighten things up later than it is to darken everything into shadow. So paint your painting as if it's all at sort of an overcast midday. So that's where all of your shadow colors are going to have this like cool sky blue going into them because the sky is blue in this case. Getting that distinct Fortnite style requires that you paint with a lot of selections, using the airbrush to fill in those large sections with a gradient. You want to use a lot of gradients, and then you'll come in later with the detail brushes. But for the beginning part, you want to just start laying everything down in large blocks with the airbrush and selection tool. I use my chisel brush, which if you have my brush pack, you know my favorite brush is my chisel brush and my watercolor brush. No watercolor brush in this one. That's not Fortnite style. They don't do watercolor. But you know, you could totally use the watercolor. You could do whatever art style you want, really. It was just my target. My goal was to capture a little bit more of a Fortnite style with this piece. And you have to follow the rules of the art style you're targeting, that you're aiming for. If you're trying to get a job on World of Warcraft, but you don't paint anything like the World of Warcraft style, you're wasting everyone's time by applying. Remember that your value range is dependent upon how far back that plane is in your composition. Try to think of your piece as though you have multiple layers of depth, like cardboard cutouts that you're laying into a shadow box. Your foreground cardboard cutout plane is going to have a much more broad range. It's going to get the darkest values in your whole piece are going to be in that foreground, especially if you have a lot of atmospheric diffusion. The middle ground is going to go to like 50% in your value scale, and then the further back you go, the lower it gets in the value scale, so that you're only working within a small range when you're in those backgrounds. Otherwise, if you got dark things back there, they're going to look like they're in the foreground with the foreground plane. Don't forget to add reflections to your water area so that that material on the surface of the water feels very reflective. You're catching bounced light coming off of the surfaces, especially if they're hitting those rocks with a little bit of a color dodge layer, and you're getting a little bit of warms in the areas where the sun is hitting it from the right, casting shadows towards the left, clustering all of your shadows into big massive chunks so that they read as solid objects, almost flattened out by the atmospheric diffusion as they go further back into the distance, so that those mountains way back there almost look like flat cardboard cutouts. If you have a house in there, or if you have a city on a spire of rock out there, try to think about what kind of rooftop shapes they might have and what you're implying about their culture. Make sure that you consider how they would get in and out of the city, and would they have defenses? Is this a city that's under siege, for example? And try to write the story into the environment painting. How do they get from point A to point B? Do they have land bridges? Do they have wooden scaffolding and wooden bridges between the structures of this suspended city that's built into the spire, for example? Every piece might change as you progress, so consider that maybe you want to have a darker water horizon, and then it meets like this really bright sky. It's okay to make changes even late in the game. Keep double checking that perspective grid to make sure that any human-made structures are consistently in the same perspective. You guys know me, I'm big on stories, so when you're building these structures, try to give them some sense of actual construction. Think about like how they might build the buildings and what's holding them up, and what happens after 100 years. Do buildings crash down into the water? One of the key things to doing interesting landscapes is having like little nooks and crannies and caves behind waterfalls and things like that. Going through your checklist, you're going to also want to keep making sure that you go back and double check that you've got all of your reflections in your water. You don't want to forget those. Otherwise, your water won't feel reflective. It won't feel different than the matte surface of the grass and the stone. If you struggle with any one particular material, stop what you're doing, put down your landscape painting, and focus on just painting that damn rock from 5 different lighting situations, and just focus on the one rock until you've got it right, and then apply that same rock into your landscape painting. As you get closer to the finale, as you get closer to the crescendo, it's time to finally bust out that dodge, linear dodge, and that burn, so you can get a nice glow in your core shadows, and you can get a nice cool color bouncing up throughout all of your shadows, so that your sky feels like it's really reflecting light into those shadows and bouncing up some of the reflections from the grass into the trees and up onto the rocks from the water. Making sure all the while that you're keeping in mind where you want the viewer to look, so that your highlights are the focus. The points of highest saturation and color are going to be where the viewer's eye is going to go first. And if the majority of your piece is in cool blues, and then you have like this strong hit of red on these building tops, your viewer's eye is going to go directly to those building tops. Keep in mind your composition. You may need to extend the canvas, and go in and paint in a little bit more sky, so that the whole piece feels like it's got a little bit more of an adventure, open world feeling to it. And a nice big bright blue sky for the player to explore, and that can really help sell your image. So there's my extremely condensed breakdown of a lot of the things that I picked up from doing this. Of course, for those of you that are hardcore and more serious about developing your landscape painting skills, I do want to encourage you to go and check out the 3-hour workshop. It also comes with an 8-hour real-time video. If you are just starting your art journey and all this looks fascinating and exciting to you, the best place for you to start is with my easy art lessons. Most people skip the fundamentals because it's boring, they feel like it's frustrating. I make it fun, and that way 5 years from now you're not looking at your artwork and going, "I can't figure out what's wrong with it." That's what the easy art lessons will teach you, to find what's wrong with your artwork. You can be drawing awesome stuff in one weekend. And of course, here on my YouTube channel, I do answer a lot of questions about working as a professional artist. So if you have questions, leave those in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and click that bell. And until next time, we'll catch y'all mañana, and ciao, baby. Oh yeah.